Welcome to day 2 of GTA's 2021 Technology Summit. I can imagine there's still a few of you still out in the hallway making your way into the back of the room with a fresh cup of coffee. As Calvin Rhodes implied in his opening remarks yesterday, I hope this is the last time that we have to conduct this event virtually. But I'm so thankful for the technology, and I'm proud of the team that has pulled this together and made today's meeting possible. I'd like to start by thanking each of you for your presence and participation here today. I'm also thankful to our sponsors, Merlin and Compliance Point, and I encourage you to take advantage of the breakout sessions to engage with these sponsors, with one another, and with today's presenters. This year's theme is Accelerating Digital, and today we have a great lineup of presenters on topics related to broadband. I'm Christopher Nunn, Commissioner of the Department of Community Affairs. For the past 3 years, Calvin Rhodes and I, along with our teams at DCA and GTA, have partnered to lead the Georgia Broadband Deployment Initiative. It's my pleasure to join you today and to kick off this informative discussion. You'll be hearing from many of our team: Dina Perry, Executive Director of the Georgia Broadband Program; Bill Price with GTA, our partners at the Department of Education; and last but certainly not least, the Carl Vinson Institute of Government, which has been such a vital partner since day one. In this audience, and especially in this format, I need not regale you on the importance of broadband to our lives and our ability to serve our constituents. Today, we're going to hear from those who are working to bring acceptable quality broadband service to every corner of our state. Unfortunately, we know that there are more than 1 million Georgians for whom this is currently not a reality. Collaboration, data, and community assistance. These are hallmarks of the Georgia Broadband Program, and 3 things that I think you will hear as a common thread throughout today. Let me speak briefly to each of these, and I'll start with collaboration. GTA, the Department of Community Affairs, and the Department of Transportation have teamed since the early days when the legislature first highlighted the importance of rural broadband and challenged us to work to address the need. We've worked closely with our private providers all across the state who will be instrumental in resolving this issue, as well as with ACCG and GMA and local development authorities who understand the specific needs within their communities. I can't thank these partners enough for their dedication and their engagement, from the largest broadband providers in our state to smaller local providers, even the EMCs. Thank you for your partnership and commitment to helping resolve the need of so many unserved Georgians. Together, and it will take all of us, we can solve this problem in our state. Now, there's another important aspect of collaboration that I must acknowledge, and that's the great work between and among state agencies. Y'all may have heard that Georgia has been named the best state in the nation in which to do business for 8 years in a row. Well, Governor Kemp loves to brag about the underlying details to this ranking, which include a #1 ranking for collaboration among state agencies. That benefits not only traditional economic development activity, but also the community infrastructure work that goes on related to broadband. For 2.5 years, agencies including state properties and the Department of Education and Board of Regents and the Department of Public Health and Economic Development and so many others have joined DCA, GTA, and the Department of Transportation every 6 to 8 weeks to discuss broadband priorities. Over the past year during COVID, these relationships that have been built have paid many-fold dividends as our broadband team worked with the Department of Education, leveraging data to identify and address remote student connectivity needs. You'll hear more about this later today. Next, let me touch on data. You know, there are communities and states all across our nation who struggle with the same plight about broadband connectivity. We work closely with other states to share knowledge and insights and best practices. which is how I know that Georgia's data is second to none. I hear other states who would give anything to have our information at their fingertips in order to make informed decisions and sound community investment. This started with a unique, first of its kind in the nation mapping program. I'm sure many of you have heard about this, and you'll hear more later today from Eric McCrae and the talented team at Carl Vinson, again, who have been our fantastic partners, particularly on the mapping program. One of our southeastern sister states, who, by the way, has not lagged in their broadband investment, commented to me when we launched our inaugural Georgia broadband availability map last June, that Georgia had changed the landscape for state broadband programs. And that's a testament not only to our outstanding team, but also to the providers with whom we have partnered. But our available data doesn't stop there. We have cost data and other data sources that can be used to make important decisions about how best to serve local communities in every corner of the state. We acknowledge that solutions will not be one size fits all, which is why our program has developed resources to help communities and their provider partners to make effective local decisions. And that's a great segue into my last point about community assistance. We could have the most collaborative team, we could have the best data in the world, but if we don't deliver quality broadband service to those Georgians who are currently unserved, then we've missed the mark. So our team is also focused on and available to engage with local communities to help you understand how and where and what resources are necessary to address local needs. Tapping into local resources such as SPLOST and economic development for funding, identifying available federal and state grant funds. We're also looking at the recently passed American Rescue Plan as a potential mechanism for funding along the way. Our team has worked closely with counties and cities across the state. Speaking of grants, I'm delighted that Governor Kemp has continued the commitment of his administration to rural broadband by including $30 million in this year's state budget for broadband grants to assist communities in addressing local needs. Grantsmanship is a hallmark of the Department of Community Affairs, and one thing we bring to this collaborative broadband initiative. I look forward to sharing more about the state broadband grant program in the coming days and weeks, and you'll hear a little bit more from Dina Perry later today in her presentation. I hope you enjoy this summit. Momentarily, you'll hear from Kyle Jones at GTA, who will explain our next segment on remote work. What better way to highlight an important use of broadband in our state? Again, today's focus is on broadband, and our overall theme is accelerating digital. I hope you enjoy the conference. I hope you find it informative and useful, and I appreciate your allowing me the time to kick off today's session. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle Jones from GTA. I want to thank you for attending our 10th annual summit, Accelerating Digital. I hope you're having a great day so far. We've got some great material yet to come. A few housekeeping items I'd like to go over. All summit presentations are in Zoom webinar, and your microphone and camera will not be active. We encourage you to type questions for presenters using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. For technical issues, also use the Q&A function, and a support person will assist you. You'll use the same Zoom webinar link you used to log in at the beginning for all presentations. This link will also return you to presentations if you need to step away. Three times throughout the summit, you'll be able to choose from specific networking breaking options. Networking breaks are supported by Zoom meetings, so you'll have the option to use your camera and mic to engage with sponsors, speakers, and other attendees. Watch for them at the end of each presentation. Formal networking breaks will have limited capacity, however. So if your first choice isn't available, try another. So let's talk about remote work. Remote work is something everyone here is familiar with, and you may be wondering whether you should tune in for the next 45 minutes to learn more about it. My response would be, yeah, you should. Everyone here is probably aware that GTA has published a technology guideline for the remote worker that details essential steps all should take to protect state equipment, assets, data, and systems while teleworking. We're not going to talk about that here, but the information is available on the landing page for the GTA site under policies and standards. What we have coming up is 4 outstanding speakers who will share insights about how to shift to leverage new ways of engaging, what works and what doesn't when working with groups, and what the future of work will be. So our first presenter is Renee Safrata, CEO and founder of Vivo Teams. She'll be talking about Shift Happens. Over the past 30 years, Renee has worked with thousands of companies and executives throughout North America and Europe, helping them connect, adopt new behaviors, and become confident members of highly functioning teams. Human connection and talent development are at the core of everything Renee touches. From one-on-one and team training to speaking engagements, she clearly demonstrates how this philosophy of connection is what ultimately drives productivity and directly contributes to company results. She now has over 10 years of experience leading a remote team and creating and delivering educational, entertaining, and unique virtual learning experience. Stay tuned for Renee.
How are you handling change? Perhaps it's easy and effortless for you. You feel resilient and flexible. Or perhaps it's not so easy. You feel like you have cement wrapped around your boots. You're frustrated and you're stuck. I think that's the point, that all of us experience change differently, all of us manage change differently, and we measure change differently. Right now, across the globe, change has become the constant. And actually, when I sort of forecast into the future, I think that that may be the way it is for the rest of my life, that change will be the constant. It is my job to understand how am I managing that change and how am I working with other people and essentially matching where they are in their change process. I'm Renee Sofrata, the CEO and founder of Vivo Team. One of my favorite statements is that shift happens, and I truly believe that. I'd like to share a little bit about my story and then talk more about this whole idea of managing and measuring the pace of change. And shift happens. So I have had an entrepreneurial career. I'm on my 5th business, and what I decided to do 10 years ago was essentially to create a complete pivot for my business. What that meant is I had been a consultant in the learning and development space, and I was providing corporations with facilitated trainings in a classroom environment. I did my research and I realized that change was upon us and that probably in 2020 things would go digital. Training and development would be most effective if it was in a virtual instructor-led format. So 10 years ago I did the research. I made the decision to get a group of people together around me who were willing to make a pivot and to essentially dive into the unknown, peeking around the corners, making some guesses about what could happen. With that team, we first articulated the best outcome for teams and leaders across the globe, how they could connect, learn, and develop together. What would that look like? Once we had figured out what the successful outcome looked like, we had to then put in milestones in place to go along our implementation path. That was as an internal team. So I'll pause there in the story for the moment. I can only imagine that you can see the difference, that because I created that pivot and that change for my company, I've had the liberty of time to do things well, to do things slowly, and to engage people in that shift happens path, to manage the pace of change with the liberty of time. I also know that this pandemic dealt a hand of decisions for many companies. People had chosen that they were going to implement change, but all of a sudden the pandemic threw down its ugly hand and said, you are changing now. And we hear that a lot of companies are 5 years beyond where they thought they would be today because they have embraced that change and they've moved forward. While other companies remain stuck, still thinking that possibly this whole thing's going to get forgotten and we'll just go back to normal. Well, that's the pace of change. Some people are managing it with easy effortlessness, flow, and just flying forward, while others are a little bit stuck. So I guess my point is to consider for you, where are you personally? Where is your team around managing the pace of change? And what is the whole perspective around what can be done and what can't be done? I'd like to share a little bit of what I think are sort of the successful steps to manage change and the pace of change effectively. Again, remembering shift happens. So we have to be a little bit flexible with it. Number one, this whole idea of figuring out what does a best case scenario look like. We may not know what all of the outcomes are, but we can guess on some top high level points that we would make a philosophy or a theory that a best outcome will look like this. The second thing that we need to do with that theory, that concept, is to get the people around the table and make sure that they are aligned to that idea, even though there are a number of unknowns. Once we have the decision of this is what a best case scenario is going to look like, then we can start to path out, again, with a lot of unknowns, what key implementation milestones might be. So that's number one. Getting the whole idea of what is the change that's going to happen and how do we need to implement across a change pathway. Number two is this whole idea about alignment. Understanding, like I said at the beginning of this video, is this whole idea that people in our humanness, we embrace change at different paces. So to really get a clear understanding around the people that are around the table of what is their willingness to move quickly or their willingness to move slowly. And how can those who are willing to move quickly possibly influence those who are willing to move slowly? And how can those who are willing to move slowly influence those who are willing to move quickly? Because the truth is, there's no right or wrong answer. It's more about managing together and collaborating together. As well, being very flexible that we will encounter moving 2 steps forward, but we'll have to be resilient with the fact that we may move 3 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But yet along the long-term path, we will get there. So again, number one, figure out the path, figure out the implementation plan. Number two, think about people and the pace of change, the willingness to influence one another. And number three, then to think really about monitoring and measuring that pace of change. Not personalities and resistance and that type of thing, but behaviors. What are the behaviors that are indicating to me that my fellow colleague or coworker is having difficulty pushing through to this one little decision, this one little yes that actually is critical to the path unfolding? What's the resistance? What are the behaviors that I'm seeing? Think about that as almost taking your iPhone or your mobile device and tracking on a video the behavior you see. Perhaps in meetings, that individual is resistant to bringing forward their viewpoint or resistant to bringing forward a decision or even a suggestion of how to step back. Those are behaviors. Think about behaviors, not personality. If we can look at behaviors, then together we can speak to those behaviors and we can notice those behaviors and encourage or be willing to influence the other and have some really, really deep conversations about how we are monitoring and measuring the progress and the pace of change. Because again, shift happens. Number 4 is to think about this whole idea of the domino effect. So this is something that really sort of, I think I didn't plan for, and I think in my story came out of the blue. While I was so focused on this whole idea of implementing change for learning and development and our delivery online, I failed to consider that absolutely everything else within the company had to go online. That meant our operations. And once operations was online, that meant our injections or interactions and conversations with our prospects and our sales process. That had to be online. So it was a little bit of the domino effect. You're going down such a rabbit hole of figuring out this one problem, but actually then the domino effect of change starts to cascade and be important that you pay attention to that. So number one, you've got the path, you've implemented a structure. Number two, you've thought about the people and their pace of change and how their pace of change needs to be communicated at every step, whether you're moving forward or you're moving back. Number three, you have to monitor what's happening with behaviors. And number four, you have to really think about this whole idea of the domino effect. Once this changes, what else is going to have to change? And the last one is to measure how your internal change is keeping pace with your external stakeholders. I have an interesting story about this. What I know about Vivo Team is that as soon as we had everything, all cylinders working remotely, delivering our products, operations, sales, everything was online, categorized, libraried, working as a functional machine. I wasn't actually that real to the fact that when COVID hit, everything changed for our external market. What I didn't realize at the level that I should have realized perhaps was that everybody had choice. They had choice to choose Vivo Team to do everything online or to remain with one of our competitors and do everything in the old classroom setting. But once COVID hit, choice was gone for everybody that we knew. So all of a sudden, with choice gone, people came running to work with us because they knew that we had had the liberty of time to figure it out over time, and we probably were excelling at this point. We weren't sort of trying to stitch it together. So I offer that as a piece of the story to consider as well, that you're also not only thinking about internal change, but you're thinking about how is the market ready or the public ready for the change that you're implementing. Because truthfully, there could be a couple steps back that you need to go to engage, to get that buy-in and alignment from your external stakeholders before they can match your pace of change. I hope that's helpful. So my idea here is that shift happens, that we are in a global situation where change is the norm, and it might be the norm going forward. And that really, if you think about this whole idea of shift happens, but if I manage, if I monitor, and if I match the pace of change of others, I might have a winning formula. I'm Renee Safrata, Vivo Team.
Wow, that was great. Shift happens. And as we shift to our next presenter, Dr. Kuhnert, he's going to talk. He is Dr. Karl Kuhnert is an organizational research psychologist and professor of practice in the Department of Organization and Management at the Emory University Guideline Business School. Try saying that 3 times fast. He consults with firms and government agencies and teaches in the areas of leadership development, decision-making, artificial intelligence, and works globally, helping leaders apply exponential and disruptive innovation and thinking in their organizations. Stay tuned for Dr. Karl Kuhnert. He'll be talking about wins and losses.
Hi, my name is Karl Kuhnert, and I am from the Guideline Business School at Emory University. The title of my brief talk is Engaging Students Remotely, Wins and Losses. I did not find virtual teaching, it found me. It was the middle of March in 2020 when Emory went fully virtual in the classroom. Since that time, I've taught 8 classes and over 500 students virtually. I am now familiar with the wins and losses of virtual teaching. What you see to my right is the new Emory hybrid classroom that was born out of necessity. I am pretty sure that in January of 2020, this classroom was not a gleam in anyone's eye. 30 seats for students who are attending class live and another 40 who are virtual. Just looking at the classroom, you can see the losses and the potential gains in virtual teaching. Let's look at the losses first, since we tend to value losses more than gains. We tend to be more sentimental about those losses as well. For example, I know how much I miss the physicality that's present in the live classroom. Don't really have eye contact. Gestures, postures, presence. I miss the laughter. And I particularly miss these brief interactions that I have with students before class in a way to get to know them differently and perhaps actually better. And so the whole physicality of the classroom is something that I really miss. The second loss is, do we work from home or live at work? We now have these remixed spaces. Home is work and work is home. I really miss the camaraderie of my colleagues, interactions with staff, and I can't help but think that there's also a loss of community here with working remotely. Perhaps for me, I'm not even sure it's a loss, but it's certainly potentially a loss, which is, our students learning. You don't get much feedback when you're teaching virtually. I ask myself now, did the class go well? I probably never has. It's been a long time since I asked myself, did the class go well? Because I pretty much know from looking in students' eyes and their engagement in the classroom whether the class went well or not. In terms of wins, I think this first win is I'll just call it computer savvy, is that there is a learning curve to Zoom for both students and faculty. We have to spend more time. In fact, I actually have my students, making formal presentations in my classes because they're going to be needing this when they leave Emory, and they're going to be making virtual presentations for sure. I also, I put a little more emphasis on the personal presence on Zoom. What do you look like? How do you come across? What kind of backgrounds? What kind of lighting do you need? All these production values that, again, were not part of my daily routine in a classroom that's live, are now really important. And so I think about this as almost like a performance art that we need to bring to the Zoom classroom. Probably the most significant development for me, and I was really surprised by this, but on the platform of Zoom, you can do these breakout rooms. And I have fairly large classes, and to be able to break students up into groups of 3 or 4 and have them actually talk through a case or talk through questions that I pose for them, I've been really surprised at the level of depth of discussion that they've had. And I've had a number of students tell me that they just love the fact that they have gotten to know so many of their peers so well. A big part of teaching MBA students is networking, and I'm finding that they get to know each other very well through these virtual classrooms. The last point here is, and largely it's because of these breakout rooms, that I find myself actually more of a facilitator than I do an instructor, because really what I'm doing is trying to move in and out of these breakout rooms and generate discussion from the discussion they created within their own virtual breakout rooms. And so in some ways, I think I've become a better teacher as well, because again, one of the things that surprised me was that I was actually averaging about 70% of the content that I usually teach in a class. And so I had to do some editing. I had to do some things. I had to cut some things out. And as a result, I think it made my my lectures better, taking out some of that material. And so I actually credit Zoom for making me a better instructor. And I don't think I can leave this talk without at least mentioning, I think the reason why we're going to be seeing a lot more virtual teaching, not less, as we move out of this pandemic, is that this is now a global classroom. We can have people from all over the world come join my classroom in a way that we couldn't do before. And so I think we're going to see, again, a lot more of virtual teaching, largely because we can reach so many more people. Well, thank you. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me or see me at the conference. Love to meet you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Our next presenter is Dr. Keith Osburn. Dr. Keith Osburn is CIO and Deputy Superintendent for Technology Services at Georgia DOE. Prior to this role, he served as Associate Superintendent for Georgia Virtual Learning, during which Georgia Virtual achieved national exposure by leading the innovation to convert the Georgia Standards of Excellence, Georgia's academic learning standards, into an industry standardized machine readable format known as CASE. Dr. Osburn's team is one of the leading practitioners of the Open Badging Initiative, the standard considered to be the leading support for the evolution of the Comprehensive Learning Record, CLR.
Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. John F. Kennedy. It's fair to say that our world is always changing. Humans have always had to adapt and find innovative, new ways to survive and to thrive. But it's also fair to say that since the dawn of human evolution, society has never changed as rapidly and diversely as it has in the last 10 years with the advent of smartphones and other easily accessible advanced technologies. And then we have the events of 2020, and no one needs me to explain which events I'm talking about. In the last year alone, there's been a historic, rapid, and monumental shift in the job market and the way in which organizations like ours and so many others now operate. While some companies may have previously offered remote working from home as a perk of the job, it's now a critical and fully integrated component in any large-scale company's overall strategy and workflow, and it's a trend we can expect to rise in the coming years. Before the pandemic, industry experts estimated that by 2021, the remote workforce was expected to double. The experts also agreed by 2025, a whopping 70% of the global workforce will be working remotely for at least 5 days every month. Well, I think the experts got it right. Major tech companies like Facebook and Twitter are already blazing the trail by telling their teams they'll be able to work remotely indefinitely. What does that mean for us? Look at how the face of education has evolved. We definitely had a learning curve. As leaders, how do we keep our organizations afloat while keeping them highly successful in the remote world? Ways in which we make sure our approach to remote working not only aligns perfectly with the organization's strategic plan, but also ensures a consistently high level of productivity and therefore outputs. And the good news is, it's not as difficult as you might think. 2020 may well be remembered as the year we began remote working, but it will also be remembered as the year in which our societal norms were irrevocably changed. And the shockwaves hit the business sector especially hard. Literally overnight, we shifted away from the traditional office scenario and into a virtual world that severed those in-person, face-to-face interactions that we'd all been taking for granted for so long. There were no more impromptu water cooler chats about sports or the game last night or the latest Netflix series to binge watch. No more asking, hey, who's the new guy I saw walking into that empty office in the corner this morning? No more, hey, you want to grab some lunch meetings? COVID-19 single-handedly turned all of the norms of business practice on their head. But instead of sitting at home and lamenting our losses, we got proactive and we got purposeful. We began to find ways we could leverage technology and connect remotely with our teams in ways that are both safe and productive. We didn't just reinvent the wheel. We created a whole new mode of operation, one that has transported us to where we are today, where not only are businesses surviving, many, like ours, are thriving. So, what are some of the lessons we've learned on this admittedly bumpy journey? What key skills and approaches do we need to understand and then successfully integrate to ensure productivity levels at their highest? And what will the future of remote working look like? Well, here we are. There are some clear lessons we've learned so far. We know that we need to be resilient, adaptable, and forward-thinking. We also know we need to take responsibility for self-efficacy, become more self-aware, and focus more on developing our communication skills. But in terms of the specifics, there are 3 things I'd like to share today. The first is harnessing the power of the executive function of technology. It's easy to just throw technology at an organization and its employees and expect everyone to just run with it. But in most cases, that's just not going to happen. The truth is, if you don't prepare the ground for the introduction of a tech innovation properly, rather than help move the company's mission and profits forward, it has the potential to hinder them. Seriously. My mom always said, the only thing worse than not doing something is doing it poorly. It's important to remember that although technology can help to get things done more efficiently, if its introduction is handled badly, it can just as easily get in the way. That's an important point to consider. Your organization's future depends on the use of complex technologies and your employees' ability and willingness to use them. The transition from synchronous communication, like normal face-to-face conversations that don't require the use of technology, to asynchronous communication, where people are required to understand and use complex collaborative technologies remotely, often under pressure, takes planning, a solid strategy, understanding, and time. Each organization has different needs and so must consider which technologies to lean into. From there, the organization can work on engaging, motivating, educating, and managing the workforce successfully when working remotely. Simply put, know your people, know your workforce, and then choose those technologies that empower them. That may sound pretty straightforward, and it can be, as long as you know what you're doing. But there are always those team members who are less willing to take risks than others. So make the investment in your team and invest in trainings and support to encourage adoption early. For most of us, this is a new approach to work. Which brings me on to my second point. Refuse to be risk-averse. Andy Rooney, the famous radio and television writer, once talked about opportunity. He was quoted saying, "An opportunity is never lost. Someone always takes the ones that you miss." And that's something important to remember for people like us and at times like these, because right now is not the time to be risk-averse. In the modern market, things are moving way too quickly. To get ahead in the game, learn to reject your instincts to be risk-averse. We all know the decision to start a project, build an application, change a traditional practice. It's always weighted on this continuum of risk to reward. The reward, however, is never sufficient even if there's an 80% chance of success. So we have to be decisive and we have to be brave. You could say the biggest risk is in not taking any risks at all. You could also say simply we have no choice. And you'd be right, because the pandemic forced our hands. The fact is, we no longer have the luxury of weighing risk against the reward. In this brave new remote world, using technology to enable continuity of business is the only way. And to ensure success, we must embrace the necessary risks that will enable us to get where we need to be. Third and final point, supercharging our solutions-driven strategies. Yesterday, we looked for problems around already developed solutions. Today, we identify problems and then look for solutions. As we know, often design happens. Something is built or a new process is identified, and then we go searching for an attempt to find a way to use it. With this type of strategy, we identify a problem and then we use the new thing to solve it. And it worked. Society has suffered so immensely in so many ways that it desperately needed a jump start. And so in an attempt to solve the incalculable issues, businesses have had to immediately adapt, react by taking a myriad of calculated risks, and then create new ways of working to find suitable solutions. And in the current situation, the world needs those solutions yesterday. We desperately needed a vaccine. So leading pharmaceutical companies the world over tore up the rule book, started from scratch, and managed to achieve in a few months, multiple times over, what normally would have taken many, many years. And even today, people in so many countries still can't freely enter restaurants or grocery stores to purchase food. Therefore, we've had to fortify the supply chain and turn to instrument technologies so they can enable the purchase and delivery of food and supplies to the home or for curbside service. And education, in its traditional form, has suffered massively. The usual face-to-face opportunities for learning now have necessarily given way to any time, any pace, any place models. These platforms and approaches may not plug all the educational holes left by the pandemic, but there are some obvious advantages. For instance, now everyone has access to everything, anytime, and can learn whatever skills they need from the comfort of their own home, or the park, or the beach. Although the pandemic has been crushing and negative in so many undeniable ways, it's also the case that the changes brought about have forced everyone to adapt and change, and at the same time, it's opened up new possibilities. It's pushed organizations like ours into a corner where we've had to dig deeper than ever before, and in doing so, rethink what we do and work out how to do it better. As a result, we've begun to discover our tremendous, previously untapped potential. And now it's up to us to lean and lead into that opportunity and the possibilities. Finally, what can we expect the remote working future to look like? Well, the upside of all the pandemic-induced mayhem is that for those who have the mindset and technology, our industry could flip the narrative completely and help write the playbook on how to succeed in business during a time of monumental global change. For us as leaders, that's obviously very good news. Couple this with the immediate and significant financial gains due to reduced overhead costs, economical future-forward office spaces which are blended, they're flexible, and they're technology-rich. And if we believe the data from a recent Robert Walters study, increased productivity rates at near the 80% mark, it seems we've struck a balance with benefits for all. And for me personally, it's an exciting prospect. For a long time now, People have worried that the advancement of technology threatens to rob us of our humanity, but I would argue differently. In my opinion, during this pandemic, technology has actually preserved our humanity and shown that with proper support, without fear of risk, and with a solutions-driven focus, we can do more of ourselves and each other than ever before. We can do more for ourselves and each other than ever before. Regardless of total sales, productivity, and profit margins, I believe that's the most important thing of all. Technology should connect what truly matters. Will things ever be the same again? There's not the remotest chance of that. But I firmly believe the future is bright for all those who are open enough, knowledgeable enough, considerate enough, and courageous enough to succeed in this brave new remote world. Thank you.
Outstanding. And our final presenter in this series will be Dr. Jen Bonnett. She's the Vice President of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Savannah Economic Development Authority. She'll be discussing the future of work is. Jennifer Bonnett is a recovering entrepreneur turned entrepreneurial ecosystem builder focused on helping entrepreneurs launch, grow, and scale technology businesses in the Savannah, Georgia region. Jennifer serves technology entrepreneurs through her role as Director of the Creative Coast and Vice President of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for CETA. The objective of CETA is economic development for Chatham County in Georgia. Jennifer's focus is to attract and retain technology companies and workers. Stay tuned for The Future of Work Is with Dr. Jen Bonnett.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Bonnett. I'm the Vice President of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for the Savannah Economic Development Authority and the Executive Director of the Creative Coast. And I am here to talk to you about the future of work. This is me in People magazine, circa 2002. I am a chief technology and entrepreneur that's worked with numerous venture-backed and angel-backed startups. As a chief technology officer, it was my job to get butts in chairs. I had over 600 employees, and it was my job to make sure that they were productive and working as many hours a day as possible. I picked office locations based on where restaurants were nearby so they could walk to a quick lunch instead of getting in a car and possibly get stuck in traffic. So I understand the tie-in, the appeal of an office, but our world has changed, right? I also have been run the incubator for the state of Georgia at Georgia Tech. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm currently with CETA. I became an expert in this topic, the future of work and remote work, and whether that's what happens in the future, primarily because when COVID hit, I was sent home on March 12th with a potential exposure and told to shelter in place. Mind you, this was pre-testing being available and when very little was known about COVID. And after I went through a funk for 2 or 3 days, I started trying to think about what does this mean to the future of work? And what does this mean to me in my job as trying to recruit technology companies to Savannah, Georgia? And what I came to realize is that in the middle of a pandemic, companies probably aren't going to move their headquarters. So I started thinking about how can I leverage this time? I know it sounds bad, but how can I leverage this time, a pandemic, to try and build my tech ecosystem in Savannah, Georgia? And we instituted a set of incentives to convince people that were told that they could work remote, possibly forever, to move to Savannah and stay for at least 2 years. And if you do so, I will pay for your move. That led me to become an expert. We got tremendous press from these incentives. I've had over 50 interviews with the New York Times, Inc. magazine, Fortune, Forbes, and my favorite, SouthernLiving.com. So that's how I became an expert in this. So a little bit back, I already told you, March 12th, I was sent home from work to hold the shelter in place because I was possibly exposed at a very large meeting at our office. That happened across the globe, really, but predominantly in the United States in mid-March of last year. We went from pre-COVID, 32 million people, about 20% of the population working from home, to during COVID, 62% of the population working from home, for over 100 million people, that is, that are working from home. Plus, on top of that, nearly 14% of the US population was let go or furloughed and went on unemployment in this time frame. This is March and April of last year. Mind you, think about the employers. They sent everybody home with less than 48 hours notice. It was like, oh, we're sheltering in place, pack your stuff, go home, you're gonna work from home. We don't really know how it's gonna work. We don't really have the tools for it, but go home and we're not sure when you're coming back. Go. That's what happened. Insane. Here we are 14 months later. Many people, and it's hard to find a study that shows this, but some studies say 42% of people are still working from home. But, we are seeing vaccines being rolled out, right? Nearly 40% of the US is at least partially vaccinated, right? And we are seeing max ordinances and restrictions being lifted, right? Texas Rangers, full stadiums, no restrictions. The Oscars are going to be live this year, right? Bars and restaurants, totally open, no restrictions. At the same time, we're having a significant labor shortage. The labor shortage especially has hit the tourism industry and restaurants hard, but it's also hit the folks that we have called essential workers, the grocery store folks, the warehouse folks, because they've worked this entire time and they're burned out. So we are opening, right? And it feels pretty good. Still a little iffy, but it feels pretty good. So that's what's going on in the world. What's going on with work, right? Over 70 companies have gone public and said work from home is fine for the future, indefinitely. Big companies, mostly tech, right? Basecamp, some of these companies, Basecamp has given up their offices. Twitter and Square have said go home, stay home forever if you want. Facebook has identified that they are opening their offices, but over 80% of their folks are probably going to be working from home in the future. One of the outliers here is Nationwide. They actually released several office buildings and told their employees to work from home for the future. So companies are embracing this. A lot of them are tech, a lot of them are newer companies, and a lot of them already had remote workers or had tools in place, right, like Slack, to communicate while they were home. At the same time, a study by PwC recently showed that 75% of all employers expect people to be back in the office by July. Right? PwC would typically study the IBMs, the really large companies, right? And so employers want people back in the office. In fact, by January, 98% expect everyone to be back in the office, right? Yet employees, 18% say they never want to go in the office again. So we have this disconnect. On top of that, employers are struggling with how to bring people back safely. I love this image because they've got glass partitions on top of the cubicles and everyone's wearing a mask, right? So how do we bring people back safely, right? There is some adoption to the vaccine, and executives from companies are very excited about the adoption and the vaccine. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that there's still variants, right? And that not everyone's getting vaccinated. And the vaccine may actually have a very short shelf life as the amount of time that it protects us. So top challenges for executives bringing people back to the office is how do they feel safe? What do we do about childcare? A significant portion of childcare facilities have closed down due to COVID and may not ever reopen because they were struggling small businesses. What do you do if you're in a big city where everyone comes to work on a subway? Will people ever feel comfortable with that type of transportation again? We don't know, right? And then some are worried about or just want to stay home. Some executives want to stay home, right? So that's what the executives want. What do the employees want, right? That becomes the big question. And for that, I have this awesome little video.
Hey, we got the surveys back for employees want to move forward in the workplace. Do you mind taking a look and proposing something that could work for everyone?
Yeah, of course. Okay, 80% of employees do not want to return to the office full-time. Okay, cool. Same. However, 65% at least want the option to go in. Well, we could make a stagger schedule. 99% of employees absolutely do not want to be held to a schedule. Sure, flexibility is important, maybe with office hoteling, and 87% of employees are not comfortable with hoteling / giving up their offices. Of that 87%, 93.25% also do not want to be expected to occupy said offices. Okay, this is getting tricky. It sounds like the best choice is for everyone to just keep working from home. 100% of employees would be fine with that, but the jaded CFO thinks working from home is a farce for hooligans, and that's not how they did it back in his day. I don't make enough money for this shit.
So I love this video. Great comedian, actress that's using TikTok as her platform and talks about this topic a lot. So I suggest you look her up. Talk Isabeth. Okay. The truth is that the video is pretty much spot on. She did her research, right? Workers say that they would prefer to work at home, work remote. 87% said that they want to work from home at least one day in the future, right? And 1 in 3 has said that if you force them to come back into the office every day, they will quit, right? And at the same time, you've already got an issue where 26% of all workers say that they're considering leaving their job currently based on the way that the company handled culture. And that's heavily ranked in the millennials and the Gen Xers, so your core workforce today. In fact, those folks are giving you a C as to how you managed COVID, right? At the same time, there's a little bit of a disconnect because 2 in 3 remote workers believe that their career is better when they have in-office time. So they want some time in office so that people can see how they're performing and that they can move up the ladder and have mobility in their career. But at the same time, if you bring them back into the office every single day, they will quit. And at the same time, we have to remember that for the most part, remote work worked, right? 71% of employees said they were just as productive, if not more productive at home. 83% of employers felt that it worked, right? And remember, this was not the same old thing, right? This is work from home or work from anywhere, as we've been doing it or calling it, is not the same as work from home during a pandemic, right? Work from home in a normal world might mean you go to a co-working space a couple of days a week. It might mean that you go to a coffee shop a couple of days a week, and it might mean that you go to the office a couple of days a week, right? You have the opportunity to get out of your house. You're not in your house 24/7 trying to homeschool, do your work, and clean and care for your family. This is a different thing, right? So as we look towards the future, we have to remember that work from home and or work from anywhere is not the same as working from home during a pandemic. So what is the future of work? The future of work is, drum roll, flexibility, right? Why? Why do we need to be flexible? Well, employees have the upper hand, right? A really great employee that you need, that is a great team player, has tremendous skills, right? And is just a key asset for your organization. If you tell them that they have to work in the office 8:30 to 5 every single day, starting, I don't know, August 31st, they will likely quit because somebody else will hire them and allow them the flexibility that they desire. So employees have the upper hand, and we're going to have to treat employees as individuals and not make rules and hard rules that break the individual's right. And we're going to have to learn to truly measure people by their performance, not necessarily whether they're in the office or not. Here's a great quote by Brent Hyder, the Chief People Officer at Salesforce. An immersive workspace is no longer limited to a desk in our towers. The 9-to-5 workday is dead, and the employee experience is about more than ping pong and snacks. I can remember as a chief technology officer buying Herman Miller chairs and 3 monitors for my best developers. And that's how I got them in the office, right? Well, they've now got that set up at home, right? They don't want to come in the office. So how am I going to incentivize them? How am I going to reward them? If I tell them they have to be in every day, they're going to leave and go to somebody else that probably pays them better and probably, well, will give them the flexibility they desire. So things have changed. We have to rethink how we measure performance and how we incentivize our employees, right? I do believe hybrid is the new normal, and I do believe that a lot will change, right? Work from home during a pandemic, being sent home to work from home during a pandemic with 48 hours notice, with no tools, no training, no systems in place. We got through it, but that's not the future. The future is sitting down and being strategic and thinking about how to create your culture for your office in the future. And some things that you can think about is, how is the office space going to be used? What's important? What activities need to be done in the office versus can be done remotely? Do you downsize some of your office? If so, how do you handle the office space? Are you hoteling? Is it shared office? I mean, the video joked around about the people that have offices don't want to give up their offices even if they're not using them, right? So how do you think about doing that fairly, right? How do you maintain corporate culture in a hybrid environment when some people are in the office and some people are not, right? Employers have been given a C by employees as to how they've maintained that so far in the pandemic. So we have a chance to fix that C and make it an A if we consciously decide how we're going to build our corporate culture. It's not about desks or people at desks, butts and chairs, as I called it before, right? How do we do this? And then how do you manage performance and incentivizing employees in this new world? And then lastly, how do we handle the PTSD that some of your employees are suffering from the last 14 months? How are you successful in navigating this time? Right? It's a time to start over. It's a time to sit down and strategize. It's a time to listen to employees en masse. It's a time to listen to employees as individuals. You need to be open. You need to be flexible. You need to think agile. Right? You need to figure out how to structure your business such that the next crisis that comes down, be it a hurricane in my region, be it another pandemic, be it a variant takes off and is not covered by the vaccine, how can your business be agile such that you can move quickly, adapt, keep your corporate culture in place, keep your employees in place, and move forward, right? And then mostly, I think the key to all of this is communicate. Communicate, communicate, communicate. I am Jen Bonnett. I'd like to invite you to come visit the Creative Coast. In fact, hashtag choose Savannah. You can find me on Twitter at Jen_Bonnett, or my email address is here, jbonnett@ceta.org. I've enjoyed this presentation. I hope you do too, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.